This is Horam with Horam's Quorum. My guest today is Ashwin Krishnan, who is the general counsel of the Miami Marlins. I did not know a lot about baseball or the insides of a baseball team until I talked to Ashwin. I learned a little bit, and I'm really fascinated in particular with how he forged his own path and bootstrapped his role. And I think it's incredibly inspiring, and hopefully you'll learn something along the way as well. Here's Ashwin.
Well, Ashwin, thanks for taking the time to talk. This is I'm looking forward to round two here.
Yeah, no, happy to be here. Thanks for having me and excited to do this.
So we talked last time, and so I'm not exactly a sports maven, and you were telling me though that this is something you had your eye on, since even entering law school. So just talk about that. Talk about the vision that you saw for yourself and the path you set yourself on.
Yeah. So I grew up, huge sports fan. Obviously, with my parents being immigrants to this country, they weren't aware of U.S. sports and everything else. And I think it was probably something I did to probably become more American. Follow U.S. sports, have things to talk about with my friends. And yeah, for me, it just became something I was really passionate about. I really enjoyed, watching baseball, football, basketball, tennis. Those are things I kind of grew up watching and playing. And, over time for me, it just kind of became something where I was, spending so much of my time following the news or just thinking about it or just otherwise spending time kind of consumed in the world of sports. And as I started to get, into college and eventually law school, I kind of wanted to see if there was a way I could make this my career. Obviously, I didn't have a great plan or anything like that, going into college and I didn't really know much about what was kind of behind what we saw on TV. You see athletes playing a sport, but you don't really know what goes on behind the scenes to put that all together and all the people involved. And so I didn't really have a sense that this was a career for me. I kind of said, okay, this is something where I'm going to enjoy watching it. I'm going to be passionate about it. But, I'll probably just, whatever my career is, this is just going to be a side kind of hobby or passion. But when I was in college, I had an opportunity to intern for the NBA. And that was really my first exposure, to understanding how big the business of sports was. All the people, all the money, everything that goes on behind the scenes, all the different companies that are involved, to kind of put the product we see, on TV, make that all happen. And so that was really my first opportunity and window into that. At the time in college, I was kind of political science, really focused on that and didn't really have a career plan in mind. I thought maybe law school. I ended up eventually going to law school, and that's where I kind of, really started to take shape for me of, okay, all these companies, all these sports leagues, they have teams, they have vendors that they work with. There's all these associated entities, whether it's TV networks, apparel companies, now, obviously, we have sports betting companies. There's so many kind of ancillary businesses associated with the sports that we know and love. And that's where I kind of realized, okay, all these companies need lawyers. Like everything else in this world, there's lawyers everywhere. And I kind of said, okay, I'm in law school now. Maybe there's a chance I could work for one of these entities. Maybe there's a chance I could kind of intern, build connections, and then eventually work my way into this field. And I would kind of marry, two of my passions here. One, which is, sports and everything else going on with also the practice of law and being a good lawyer. And though that was kind of the first window I got into that. And I'm happy to I've talked for a while. I'm happy to go further into kind of the specifics of that in law school, if that's where you go next or anything you want to talk about there.
Yeah, what's interesting about that is I feel like there's any number of people who just really care about sports, but I think it's pretty unusual. It's pretty different that you actually decided to do something about that. Because law is such a tracked path, right? And so, and particularly, you went to Harvard Law, right? So so many of your peers have really tracked paths. So it's really very interesting that it must have taken significant effort to do that, because the law school I went to a regional school, the John Marshall Law School, and you don't have the same tracks you do at Harvard Law. And so I think it gave a lot of people a lot more creativity and entrepreneurial kind of approach to what they're doing. I knew a couple of people who was like, I want to go be a sports agent or whatever. But I think that's really interesting and unusual to do that. Do you feel that you're unusual in that regard? And so what is it that I want to kind of understand, like, what made you say, I can actually go do that thing?
Yeah, no, that's a great question, and you particularly true with Harvard Law School, as you mentioned. I think a lot of my peers and classmates have gone on to careers at law firms, at financial services companies, clerkships, working in the government sector. All these paths are very well established at a law school like Harvard, where again there's a long legacy of people going into these very traditional fields and very noble work and very financially rewarding as well. So, I think there's a reason why we see so many people who come from, let's say, Harvard Law School go into these fields. For me, I kind of realized, I think kind of early, probably in some point in my 1L year, that really wasn't for me. I knew as kind of a backup, I was going to go through OCI, go interview with all the law firms, do summer clerkships, do all that, because I knew, there was no guarantee that I was going to get a job in sports. But I think at the same time, I kind of told myself I was going to do everything I could to get into this field. I viewed my 3 years in law school as really a great opportunity to reach out to people in the industry. I think all of us remember being in law school and not knowing exactly what we wanted to do. And so I kind of thought that was a great, platform for me to use to reach out to folks, whether they were academics, whether they were practitioners working at teams, leagues, agencies, whatever it may be. I mean, I went to so many conferences and panels and other things. I joke with people that I probably majored in sports law. I know in law school you don't really have a major, but for me, that's kind of what I felt it was like, because I said, while I was taking my normal classes and everything I needed to do to graduate law school, I was also on the side kind of pursuing everything I could to kind of immerse myself in the sports law field. So, for me, it was really something where I said I was going to knock down every door I could, write a letter to everybody, do everything I could to kind of break into this field, which I knew was so competitive and tough to get into, while also preserving my ability, if it didn't work out, like it doesn't work out for many people, go down the traditional path of going to a law firm, and see where that leads me.
And so how did you pick, I'm sure it sounds like you're interested in, you like a wide range of sports, like, hey, I'm all about basketball or whatever. So, what was going into you for the criteria for where you wanted to be? I recognize you maybe were thinking, hey, just as long as I'm in the field, however that can happen. Or were you more targeted and say, hey, I need to be in Major League Baseball? Like, what was that process like?
Yeah, so I think knowing how few and far between these opportunities were, I tried to cast as wide a net as possible. I wasn't too picky about the sport or the location. I mean, for me, I kind of wanted to be a sport that I knew something about. So I focused on Major League Baseball, NFL, NBA, applied to things in tennis and soccer, hockey, sports that I was less familiar with, but I just kind of thought, again, having the experience of being in the field was just so valuable, for down the road as well, that, I thought any door I could kind of break into, I would take. So I cast a pretty wide net. Geographically, the same thing. I grew up in San Diego, but was in school in Boston, and kind of said, after I graduate, I'm open to moving wherever, knowing that, again, within what, if you kind of geographically restrict yourself, there's only a handful of teams in each city, it would make it much, much tougher for me. So I kind of was pretty open, on that front. But yeah, I tried to, again, cast the wide net as possible, knowing that, for every 10 letters you write or 10 emails you send, you may get one back and may not lead to anything. So knowing that, again, I couldn't be kind of deterred by negative feedback or anything like that, I would just kind of have to keep pressing and seeing if there was an opportunity for me.
And so how did you end up at the Marlins?
Yeah. So kind of going back to the first year of law school, I realized that, okay, sports law was something I wanted to do. I know how valuable internships are. So I was able to secure an internship my second year of law school with the Boston Celtics. I was in Boston. The Celtics were there. They had an internship program that I think actually started a year or two before me, where a Harvard law student would essentially spend the school year, part-time doing legal work, for the team. And so I had kind of made myself known as someone who was very interested in sports law, very passionate about the field, took the sports law class, did well in the class, and was able to interview for that position kind of through an established pipeline there. But really, as that was winding down my second year, it was very clear that was a one-year deal, and I had to move on, do something else my third year. I realized that, okay, this was a great opportunity for me to get into a legal organization, to get into a legal team, a legal group at a sports team, and really see what the day-to-day is like. Because again, from the outside, I found this to be true of any organization I was, looking at. I didn't really understand what they did on a day-to-day basis until I really had a chance to speak to people and really get in there and just understand kind of what the day-to-day was like. So I realized how valuable this opportunity was. And so again, I started this campaign of, okay, I got to find an internship just like this for my third year. We were fortunate to host a big symposium at the end of my second year, where we invited a lot of previous alumni, folks in the Boston area, others to kind of just talk about sports law issue on campus. And one of the folks there was the general counsel of the Marlins at the time, and they were going through this stadium process. Stadium, and I was kind of just there helping organize the conference, and I really kind of pressed him and said, I know you're going through this crazy process. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of legal work. I'm here. I'm available. I can do free Lexus Westlaw research. I can look at a contract. I can, whatever you need, I'm around and available. It doesn't have to be a formal structured program, but I just want that experience, and I want to get a chance to further build my credentials in the sports law field. And he was actually very receptive to that. In fact, that weekend of the conference, he actually gave me an assignment, and he said, "Oh, great! Like you want to do this? Okay, here you go. Research this." And I said, "Wow, okay, he's really giving me a tryout here." And like anything else, you get that opportunity, you have to take advantage of it. So I spent, pretty much all weekend when I wasn't at the conference working on this, putting a memo together, and sent that to him. And I guess, he was pleased with it and continued giving me assignments throughout that summer. And then really towards the end of the summer, I went to him and said, "Look, this has been great. I really enjoy this. Is there a chance we could formalize this into an internship, like a full year internship with the Marlins? Obviously, I'm in Boston. You're in Miami. We can work remotely." Now we all know what working remotely is, but back then it was kind of a little bit more of a, how's this going to work? I'll call you. I'll email you assignments. Is this really going to be something that's going to work for us? And again, he was open to doing it, and worked out great. I got a chance to fly down to Miami a couple times, meet some people, present some of my work. So, worked out really well. And he made it very clear, just like with the Celtics, he said, "This is not going to be a full-time job. This is a 1-year internship. That's what it is. Continue doing everything you're doing with interviewing for law firms and all that." And I actually, I took him at his word, and I said, "Okay, yeah, obviously I'd love to come, but if that's what you're telling me, I'm going to go interview." I accepted a job at a law firm in LA, moved out to LA, studying for the California bar. Prepared to go. And about 5 weeks into that summer, he called me and said, "You know what? There's a lot of legal work going on. We're building this new ballpark. He was a one-man show at the time. He said, I could really use some help. You were good. Are you available? Are you interested? Would you move out here?" I had never been to Miami at that point, other than the visits I had done during that year. "And would you be interested?" And I said, "Absolutely. Let's go. Sign me up." And he kind of said, "Do you want to hear the title? Do you want to hear the salary? Do you want to hear that?" I was like, "You can tell me all that. It's not going to change my answer." But yeah, so that was kind of that. So that happened very quickly. I switched over to the Florida bar, took the Florida bar in September, and then, started here in September of 2010. And so, yeah, I've been here ever since. It's been a great experience, and I'm sure we can get into that. But yeah, that's kind of what led me to the Marlins in Miami. And yeah, it's everybody has a very unique story of how they got into their sports team, just from talking to other folks in similar situations. Everybody's story, everybody's path is unique. As you hit on earlier, there's not one path. There's not a track for this type of work. So, it's one of those industries that really depends on the connections you make, the people you get to interact with, and what you ultimately do with some of those opportunities. So I'll stop there. Again, I went on way too long.
No, that's all really good stuff. And so I guess here, I'll pick up something that's kind of a little bit of a tangent from where we've been going so far. So talking to you, it sounds like it's a small world, people that are general counsels for major sports franchises. And I'm curious if you see any common threads in the stories that led people to, like how they got their jobs, or what is there some common DNA, between what is there something that sets you all apart? They're like, "Hey, you know what? We're just built a little bit different. We think a little bit different. We act a little different." Like, because tech in-house counsel are a certain way, pharma in-house counsel are a certain way. Like, what's unique about, the crew of people that you've gotten to know?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, I'm trying not to paint with too broad of a brush here. I think there's a lot of different personalities and a lot of different styles, just, different age groups, different backgrounds. When I just look at, let's say, my Major League Baseball group, for example, of Club Counsel. So there's all sorts of different personalities and styles. When I try to think of common threads, I think it's just being very versatile. And I know that's kind of a cliche, and there's many other fields that have folks that are versatile in-house counsel. But I think for us, I mean, I certainly see it every day, and it's just I think there's a premium on being very versatile and very flexible and able to kind of quickly put on a lot of different hats. We deal with so many different departments and so many different types of issues that pop up every day. There's not really when people ask me what's your typical day like, the answer is there is no typical day. I certainly have certain projects and things that are on my mind, but every day it's kind of whatever calls or emails I get that I need to quickly focus my attention to, and usually it's something that needs to be dealt with right away. So whether it's an immigration issue, a visa issue, or a player issue, or something going on with the sponsor, or something going on operationally at the ballpark, you just kind of have to quickly pivot and be able to, I guess, make decisions too. That's another thing. I think, a lot of lawyers sometimes get in the habit of writing memos, giving opinions, and that's all great. But at the end of the day, our folks look to us to actually help them make a decision right then and there. So we can't kind of hide behind, couched legal language of it depends, or, maybe you could do this, but there's a risk of this. You kind of ultimately have to drive to a conclusion. So I think a lot of us are used to that, where, you're put under the pressure of actually having to make a decision, not just being the legal advisor, but being a decision maker as part of the business team. So.
Yeah. And so do you think about, I guess, another thing I'm interested in is like, so what do you think about the industry you're in? Is sports, do you think of it as entertainment? I'm starting to appreciate, the possibilities that, different fields that you may not think of competing, maybe competing. Cause like, say it's the evening, it's the end of the day, and you've got some time to unwind. What do? Do you pull up a game, or do you pull up TikTok? I mean, so like, how are you starting to think about, what your niche is, and how does it affect how you make the decisions you're describing and how you lawyer?
That's exactly right. I think I don't even know what time frame, maybe 10 years ago, 20 years ago, people looked at their competition as other sports teams. They say, okay, they can either go to a Marlins game or a Dolphins game or a Heat game. But actually, when you think about it, it's like those seasons are almost offset in a way where they're not really your competition. What you said is exactly right. We're competing for someone's discretionary dollar, money that they don't need for, a vital need, but they say, okay, I have some choice of entertainment. I can do something with this dollar. I can watch a Netflix. I can pay for a Netflix subscription and watch a movie. I can go to a Marlins game. I can, go to the beach and spend money there. Whatever it is, that's what we're competing for. And I think that's the framework in which we look at it, is that we have to be entertaining as a product. When someone comes to the ballpark, they have to be entertained. Obviously the game, baseball is in a very unique situation because there's so much history and tradition, and there's a lot of folks that are really cling to that and really want to preserve that for good reason. I mean, there's just a long history and there's a lot of traditions in the game, but that's the tension we deal with every day. But look at our fans. If our fans have a short attention span, if we're in this Instagram, TikTok generation where folks are looking for the latest stimulus every second, we need to be entertaining as a product. So maybe we can't change the game on the field, but then everything else going on in the ballpark needs to be something that's catchy and that keeps people entertained, keeps people wanting to be there, wanting to, enjoy the experience, wanting to come back, thinking that they got entertained for 3 hours and it was good value for their money. So that absolutely drives our decisions every day as we think about, what do we have control over, knowing that maybe, the game itself may not evolve as fast as we would like, but, there are things we can do in terms of an entertainment product to make it more compelling.
And are there anything, as far as, where the game is heading? Because I imagine, because now we've got augmented reality and virtual reality, and now, so many people are commenting on like how important, making events and spaces Instagram friendly are. How is that affecting the business and in the direction you see it going?
Yeah, no, that's same vein of what if this is how people are consuming the game. So leave aside like, okay, yes, we set up, Instagram friendly backgrounds and booths and photo opportunities for people who come to the ballpark. But, what we're seeing now is people are actually consuming the game itself from Twitter and from Instagram. People are consuming the game on their phones, which is just a whole new level of way of taking in a game. And we're used to people either watching it at the ballpark live or watching it, on their TV or radio, and that was kind of it. That was the universe of how people would consume a game, maybe look at the box scores online or something. But now we've changed that with, the way that people do so much from their phones. That feeds into how quickly we need to have highlights available on Twitter, on Instagram, on social media of how we market the game, and how we make it exciting ultimately. Because again, like with everything else, people have a choice of what they're looking at on their phone. We want them to be consuming, for us, we want them to be consuming Marlins baseball as a league. We want them to be consuming baseball in some sense. So it's about trying to find, as you kind of put it, Instagram moments or Instagram friendly experiences for people to have when watching a baseball game. So that ties into where we see the game going. There is augmented reality. There is sports betting coming. Things that allow more interactivity, I think, are the future of this game, because that's what people want. They want to be engaged, and they want to have some sort of, connection to what's going on. It's very tough. I mean, I'm a huge baseball fan, work for a baseball team. I acknowledge it's tough to sit in one seat for 3 hours and watch a game. That's just not where we are as a society. Even the people that come to the ballpark, we know they want to walk around. They want to see other things. They want to, maybe grab a beer at a themed bar, then go watch half the game from somewhere else. And so we know that's our audience. So we have to cater to that.
Yeah, it's funny because you mentioned Netflix earlier, and I remember when I first got Netflix in like 2005 or 6, back then, you didn't have any social media competing for your attention or anything like that, so I could sit and watch a whole movie, but that's just I would watch these art house kind of films for 2 hours, or whatever, and it was amazing because you can get them on Netflix, couldn't get anywhere else. But now, attention span is such a challenge. Now, it's interesting because you mentioned the sports betting coming, and this is where I'm kind of curious is, what do you see what are the legal barriers that you're running up against to take the sports teams, to take your franchise to the next level? Or, what are the interesting, the barriers, one aspect, but then maybe another aspect is, what are the frontiers you see the opportunities for? Because I have this understanding of this legal landscape, that means there's fertile terrain over here, and that's an edge that I have over someone else. Are those ways that you're thinking about, guiding the company forward?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think there's a lot of uncertainty in this area first, and the part of the challenge is that it varies state by state. And right now, after the big Supreme Court decision a couple of years ago, we've got a lot of different states doing different things in terms of the sports gambling world, and we've got a unique set of challenges in Florida, both with our state legislature and everything they're doing. Plus, we've got the the Indian tribes here as well. They have a big foothold here in gambling, and so we've got a kind of navigate that. We've got Disney as well. They're a big player in the space, in the sense that they have, a lot of dollars vested in people going to theme parks, and, casino gambling may not be their ideal, thing to have as a competition for that. So we've got a few different kind of big players here that we've got to navigate and work through. There's a variety of different ways in which sports betting can kind of come through. So there's the brick and mortar approach. Like in one dimension, we could have a physical location where we could literally have a sports book on our ballpark premises where fans can, bet before the game, during the game, after the game. That's one kind of avenue. There's mobile betting, where you can have your fans, bet wherever they are, whether they're watching it on TV or whether they're watching it, at the ballpark or some other state or country. And then of course there's all sorts of different permutations of when you allow betting, what you allow people to bet on. Our concerns obviously, and this is being done at a league-wide level, but our concerns are obviously the integrity of the game, number one. Never want to get in a situation where people doubt the outcome of a game or think there's some sort of, point shaving or whatever it may be going on with respect to the integrity of the game. But then once you get beyond that, it's kind of also ensuring a fair playing field for people because a lot of our fans, a lot of our consumers will be participating in this, and we would never want them to kind of, have a bad experience. I know with, DraftKings and FanDuel, they had certain experiences where there were, professional folks getting in there or algorithms being used, that kind of stuff. So there's a lot to be worked out in terms of like, how do we make this a fair experience? How do we make this a a pleasant experience for the consumer. And then, also tying into all the other elements I mentioned, dealing with all the other kind of big players in Florida for us. But, even if and there is talk of being, of federal legislation in this area as well. So that's something we have to monitor in terms of what may come down as a federal framework of how this all works. So it's just kind of being mindful of a variety of different constituents and concerns, and ultimately trying to get to an area where I think as a league, we've acknowledged this is coming. Adam Silver was one of the first, the NBA commissioner was one of the first. He wrote an op-ed in the New York Times. He was one of the first kind of sports figures to kind of acknowledge that, hey, sports betting is coming, guys. We need to get around it. We can't just, for the longest time, I think all the leagues had kind of resisted it and said, no, this is going to harm the game. It's going to be bad. We can't have this. It'll ruin everything. And I think, again, everything we've just talked about, where society is, what people's attention span is, how we keep people interested in consuming our products. We acknowledge now that sports betting is something that will help drive interest in the game. We just have to do it in the right way.
And so, I guess betting is something that was, I was thinking about the ways you compete or complement with, say, Disney. So if somebody flies out to Florida, then, the fact that there's both the Marlins go see and Disney kind of like makes Florida as a whole more of a destination. But of course, the two are also competing for how much time you get. So can you talk about the ways you complement each, what are the ways, let's say the Marlins complement the Heat, or what are the ways you compete? And you kind of talked about that, in some ways you don't compete. And then likewise, expand the pool to say Disney or any of the gambling. I guess how do you think about that map where you're both competing, but you also have common interests as well?
Yeah, so let me start with the sports teams. That I'll start there and then go broader. So with the Heat and the Dolphins and the Panthers here, we certainly compete for attention. At the end of the day, fans are have a limited amount of mind space, or whatever you want to call it, loyalty space. Who they follow, who they care about. And that's something we compete for. If you're caring more about basketball and the Heat, then you're probably going to care a little bit less about baseball and the Marlins. So there's something there where we kind of compete for that. Merchandise kind of ties into that. If you're more loyal to the Heat and the Dolphins, you're probably going to buy more of their merchandise, maybe even buy more tickets to them than if you're going to kind of support the Marlins. But, I think as I touched on earlier, there's an element of also saying, we as sports teams are competing against other forms of entertainment. So if we can capture someone as a sports fan, someone who enjoys watching live performances of athletic events, that's great. Let's keep them there versus, looking at other things, whether they go to the theater, whether they go watch a movie, whatever it is. We'd rather have them be a sports fan altogether, all things considered. But then once we get them to that sports fan world, then we say, okay, how do we get the Marlins on their minds? And then we have plenty of folks that are sports fans and that say, okay, baseball season is April through October. Okay, I'm a Marlins fan. Then football, September through January, and then basketball November through June. So I'm gonna kind of segment out my sports fandom across when the teams are in season, which is fine. I think that's kind of the normal approach we see for an avid sports fan in Miami. They support their local teams and they kind of go season by season. So that's kind of the sports element of it. I think when you get to the Disney element, or you get to the broader industry element, you're right. There is a complementary framework there of, hey, let's get tourists to Florida. Let's show them all we have to offer. We have great beaches. We have casinos here. We have great hotels. We have great restaurants. Put everything out there. We have great theme parks. Put everything out there and say, these are all the things we have to offer. This is why Florida should be a great destination for tourists who are vacationing, for conferences, businesses, everything. Just bring more business to Florida. But I think the challenge there is then you get into what we're seeing right now with Disney and others, where it's, okay, great. If you're going to bring gambling here, if you're going to bring casinos here that are going to be everywhere, they're going to take away from our entertainment dollars. And sometimes it even goes against their core kind of values. Disney's very family friendly, very, that's kind of the idea of a casino to them may not be as palatable. Maybe down the line, they will have a casino on the Disney campus and say, we made this work. But, I think initially to them, it kind of strikes them as, oh, this is not family friendly when you think of the degenerate gambler or what you see in a casino and all that. So that may hurt their image. So, I think it's a challenge that we just have to continue to work on and figure out those synergies, because obviously if we're all on the same side, it makes it a lot easier. And we know that we have, we have enough opponents on, whether it's the Indian tribes or the legislators who don't believe in gambling and all of that. We've got enough opponents that don't want to expand kind of this area. So we have to work together with the ones that are willing to at least consider it.
I'm also thinking about the ways that your business is different from other businesses, and that there's such an element of community, just like, plenty of the companies, maybe they sponsor a Little League or something like that, but they're just not as inherently tied to a community. So, how does that affect how you lawyer? I mean, to what extent do you ever have to find yourself advocating for the public interest or something like that, or something that feels like that? Can you talk a little about that?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a very unique element of kind of sports teams' interaction with their communities, because we are by nature, we're very small entities. I mean, we're in the hundreds of people. We have about 200 front office staff and 200 baseball staff. So by size, we're certainly not one of the bigger companies here in Miami or in the state of Florida, but our profile is a lot bigger. So we're a private company, but very public impact or public influence. People become fans of the team, and they treat you. And we want this. We want to be the community's team. And that manifests itself in a few different ways. Number one is our community outreach and our foundation efforts. For us, it's very, very important that we're viewed as the community's team and that we are a part of this community and are a good corporate citizen. So for us, it's when COVID hits, it's providing masks, it's providing tests, it's doing food distributions, it's being everywhere in the community that we can to offer help and support. I know many private companies do offer various things, but for us, it's almost an obligation where we're expected to do something, and we're happy to do it. And we don't even want to see us out. We welcome that obligation. We look at it as, yes, we are expected to do something because we are part of this community. We are one of the pillars of this community, and you should expect to see the Marlins everywhere. You should expect the Marlins out in the community, doing good things. And so that's the biggest way I would say we've had an impact in that sense. But also just in our kind of PR approach to everything. I think we know when we speak, we have an important voice. So when, the social justice events were happening this summer and have continued into the fall and the winter here, we made sure we had a voice in that conversation. We have the first African-American CEO of an MLB team in Derek Jeter. So it was obviously very important to him, everything that was going on. And, we put up a big Black Lives Matter banner in center field. We've been very involved in social justice efforts. And, it's just kind of we view it as, we're being a good corporate citizen, but also, as I said earlier, we want it to be expected of us. We welcome that obligation, because we want to be seen as a pillar of this community. And that just, goes beyond kind of, just donating money or something like that. I think it's kind of infected. It's infected at how we operate as a business. And I think more directly what you were asking was about how does it affect my work as a lawyer. I have to have that mindset every deal we do. It affects every deal I do with our foundation, every deal I do with the sponsor, every deal I do with the vendor, knowing, again, what is going to be the public impact of this deal? What is going to be the perception of this deal? How is this going to affect the community? How is this going to affect our standing in the community? Knowing that, we're viewed as a certain type of corporate citizen, that we need to be, we need to always make sure we're mindful of how we're perceived in this community, because that's so important to us.
Now, as someone, you yourself are South Asian. So what do you feel like that you bring for a difference in perspective to the role and to what do you think, sports teams, what ways are sports teams better off by having perspectives of someone like yourself with your unique experiences? What changes when we add you to the conversation?
Yeah. So there are very few South Asians in sports. I think it's fairly well known. And it's something that, I know there's various groups that are trying to create more interest and opportunities for South Asians. And, I'm certainly supportive of all that. I think knowing our group in particular, we are one of the most diverse front offices in baseball, both at the executive level and throughout the organization. I think it's a function of where we are. Miami is a very diverse city. But even within all of that, going back to the fact that there are very few South Asians in sports, I look at myself and I look at our executive team. I look at when we get together with other MLB clubs or get together at other, South Florida forums. I tend to be the only South Asian, if not one or one other. There's very few of us in this world and in this world of sports and in South Florida generally. So, I think I bring a very unique perspective, really representing kind of the immigrant story of Asian Americans, which is different than the immigrant story of Latin Americans who are very predominant here in Miami. And I think just kind of the experiences that we have, I think our voice is not, and we've seen this on the political stage too, and our voice is not always heard as loud as it should be. We have a very important story to tell. We've been perceived sometimes as the model minority and those types of things. And I think we have a lot to offer in terms of our experiences and our story as a collective group, as a collective immigrant group that sometimes isn't heard as much. And so I'm very proud to be part of a front office that hired the first female GM, Kim Eng, who's also Asian American. And collectively, I think we've already kind of seen the outpouring of support that she's received, both from, folks that are so excited for her to be the first female in this position, but also folks that are excited to see the first Asian American in this position. So it's diversity is critical to what we do, to have a variety of viewpoints, both backgrounds, experiences, and everything else that people bring when they join a room. So, for us, it's really important that we continue to find new and diverse voices to add to the organization.
And just switching gears a little bit, you mentioned Derek Jeter coming in as CEO, and that came over with new management. And I remember you commenting on I'd asked you before, what was the project you're most proud of? And you point to the transition that you handled. Can you talk a little about that? Because I think that's kind of fascinating. I don't know so many people that have been in a role like that.
Yeah, that was a pretty crazy time. So for my first 7 years here, I was member of the legal team and then rose to the head of the legal team, and worked for one ownership group, which then decided to sell the team in, approximately January, February of 2017, ultimately closed in October of 2017. And so I was working hand in hand with our ownership group as we prepared to sell the team, had various folks that were interested in acquiring the team, had all sorts of exchanges with each of the prospective ownership groups, documents, questions, all what you'd expect when someone is making a significant purchase of this magnitude. The craziest part for me was, until the day of the transaction, until the minute the transaction closed, I was working on one side of the deal. And then the minute that transaction closed, I literally switched to the other side of the deal. So I became the buyer's lawyer, the buyer's general counsel. And so that became a very interesting period of time where I kind of had to, feel that out and say, okay, these folks don't know me other than being the lawyer for the other side. Do they trust me? Are they how is this going to work? Because obviously there were numerous items that needed to be closed kind of post closing. There were numerous items that needed to be sorted out with the old ownership group. And obviously, I think naturally for them, they had to wonder, okay, where's this guy's allegiance? What, how can we trust him? All of that. But, I worked really hard to kind of walk them through everything I was doing, have them understand why I was doing it, and really show that, my loyalty was to the organization. And that's ultimately, why I wanted to continue working for the organization and be a part of the new ownership group. And, I think over the last, it's just been just over 3 years now, I've done everything I could to kind of show them that, that's where my loyalty lies and that I want to continue to be part of this new group because of everything they're planning on accomplishing, and I'm excited to be a part of, and all the new kind of frontiers they're exploring.
All right, so I mentioned this before, but I am just so fast with how you talk, is that it is just so different from other lawyers. This is not, like talking to you is just like talking to, I could be talking to anyone at the Marlins right now. It doesn't feel like I'm talking to the general counsel. So, so that's, something I'm just going to observe. But the other thing is that I'm thinking right now is that you have to have way, way more interesting stories than, many other lawyers I could talk to. So like, what comes to mind? Or like, is there like a go-to story? Like if someone says like, oh, like what's the craziest story you have with the Marlins? Like, do you have a story like that, or can you just come up with one right now?
Yeah, it's the craziest story, the one that I always default to, is unfortunately a sad one. It's when Jose Fernandez, our star pitcher, died September 25th, 2016. That's one of those you remember exactly where you were, what you were doing when you got that call, and it was it was just a crazy circumstance. He was in a tragic boat accident here in Miami Beach, and it was just one of those things. He was such a charismatic individual. He really was the face of our franchise. I tried to think of comparisons of who he kind of like how to compare, because a lot of folks in other cities didn't know him as well or didn't really appreciate what he meant to this community. And he, the closest thing I could think of was like LeBron in Cleveland. Like that's the level of, like this was the home. He had a very typical immigrant story of coming from Cuba to Miami. His story was even crazier in the sense that, he made 3 attempts to come here. On this attempt, someone fell overboard. He jumped overboard and saved that person. It turned out to be his mother. It was just like this hero story. I mean, he was hero worshipped here, and he played the game with such love and passion and joy. And I think so many kids here just kind of looked at him and said, that's going to be me. Like, that's who I want to be. His life was cut short. He one day out on a boat and unfortunately was passed away from that accident. And, that left all of us reeling. And my job as a lawyer became immediately to, okay, let's sort out all the details of what happened. Contractually, what do we need to do? Logistically, what do we need to do? There were just kind of a million things to sort out. And I don't think we've touched on this yet, but just as a lawyer, you get involved in so many different aspects of running a sports team. You really touch every department. So, from that, on that day, for example, and the days following that, it was, dealing with our president, dealing with our owner, dealing with our GM, dealing with our public affairs people, dealing with our communications people, our finance people, because there were details to be sorted out. What happens to his contract? What happens? We set up a trust fund for his daughter. He had an infant daughter at the time, it was just just a very, very chaotic, but ultimately very. I felt rewarded as a lawyer because I was able to help sort through a lot of logistics in a period of crisis. But yeah, just a crazy circumstance where you never expect that call. And, it was a very, just a very difficult period, but one that, I again felt as a lawyer, I was able to kind of, separate some of the emotion from it and say, okay, let's focus, this is what we need to get done. Here's what needs to happen on the baseball side. We need to call up this player to take his place. We're going to postpone the game. What happens there? What do we need to do with all our sponsors, season ticket holders? Okay, then, what do we need to do with his family? What do we need, all the different pieces that are affected by one player's kind of passing. Kind of navigating that was just, it was a very daunting and challenging task, but one I think lawyers are well suited to do because we're used to multitasking, we're used to prioritizing and kind of seeing clearly through a situation that can be, very murky initially. So, again, I apologize. Not a great story, but one that always is the one that I, tell when people ask me what's the craziest thing you've been a part of, because that was just, that period of time. I remember it so vividly of just, not sleeping for that many days because there was just so many pieces to sort out.
When you're talking just now and describing all the operational components that you were kind of sorting through, it makes you wonder, do you see yourself as moving into a pure operator role at some point?
I've thought about that at times. There's certainly, like, when you look at the general counsel role, we touch so many different aspects of the operation, from the baseball side, player contracts, player issues, facilities, operations, finance, IT, HR, our sponsorship and sales groups, just every group across the organization. That I think, the more natural fit or progression I see for myself. And again, this is kind of just, if things go in that direction, would be more moving into kind of a COO type role or a president role, something like that in the future, where you more formally kind of oversee those areas in terms of just kind of growing my skill set and expertise in managing all those issues. I tend to find myself in the middle of a lot of those issues just from the legal side, but I think that would be the next progression, would be to ultimately manage and oversee those areas with the knowledge that I've kind of gained as a part of that working group.
So, the vibe I'm getting from you is that you're pretty, settled in Miami now. So let's talk Miami. So I worked on a field, on a campaign as a field organizer a long time ago, and I was based in Fort Lauderdale, so I have some exposure to Miami. And yeah, I've visited Miami a number of times with the years. Definitely enjoy myself. Right now, it's kind of blowing up. I mean, I'm sure you're seeing a lot of people who are talking about moving there, and you've been there for a number of years now. So talk about, like, how has Miami changed in the past 10 years? Are people for real with, coming to Miami and sticking there? Or are they going to just, it's going to hit July, they're going to feel that humidity and say, you know what, I'm tapping out. Not that too many people spend a lot of time with the humidity. You got all this great air conditioning, but let's talk about Miami. What's
yeah, sure. So yeah, no, I think I've seen it. I've been here 10 years, going on year 11 now, and I've seen it grown tremendously. I mean, I remember when I first moved here, parts of the town like Brickell and Wynwood, Midtown, were barely in their infancy. I mean, those areas had just been developed and were kind of in their growth stages, I would say. And the scary part to say now is they're still growing. That's the crazy part to me, is that I go to Brickell now and I look back like 10 years ago, I would say more than half of those buildings weren't even there. And now it almost reminds me of New York when I walk around, because there's so many tall high rises and there's, every convenience you can imagine, these brand new buildings, fully, full service apartment buildings, full service, everything, office buildings. And I think there's been a tremendous amount of growth here. I'll tell you this. I mean, when I first got here, September 2010, I actually wondered, a lot of my classmates obviously stayed in the Northeast. They stayed in Boston, went to New York, went to Washington, D.C. I had a handful of people that went to San Francisco, L.A., and for the Midwest folks, typically Chicago. But I always wondered, I was like, why don't more people know about Miami? I mean, this is kind of crazy. This is great weather down here, 9 months of the year. Cost of living was fairly low. I mean, I, compared my apartment rent then to like what folks were paying elsewhere. And I was like, wow, I live on like pretty much on the water, full service building, like great location. How am I paying like half of what someone's paying in New York for a shoebox or San Francisco or wherever it may be? So I kind of looked at it and said, I don't know. Is there like some kind of secret? Like, what's going on here? Why did nobody talk about Miami when we were talking about recruiting and like, where people were going after law school? And I still, to some extent, feel that way. I still feel like, okay, I don't think enough people are talking about this. I get it. There's a lot of tradition and history, and people go to these law firms and banks and wherever, because where they are. And there's a lot happening, obviously, in those cities. But I kind of feel like Miami is a little undervalued in that sense. I'm like, there's great weather here, particularly in a year like this where everyone's working from home and all that. It's like, there's great weather here, great lifestyle here. Why don't more people talk about or know about this? And obviously no state income tax, another plug there for Miami. But I still feel that to some extent. Obviously, I think there's elements of it. There isn't, there aren't a lot of big law firms here. There aren't a lot of big banks here. I think that's trying to change. I saw something about Blackstone coming here, opening up an office. So, I think there might be some change. Obviously, Francis Suarez, our mayor, tweeted quite a bit about, this being the next hub of tech, and, if people are going from California and Texas, maybe this is somewhere else they want to look. I know that narrative has been pushed for, a couple of years now. And, I'm not super familiar with kind of the tech community here, but I know it's growing. I know there's certainly incubators and, some development in that front. Hard for me to say, if that's going to catch on. It's going to become, let's say, the next SF or the next Austin. But I do see the appeal for it on a very base level of, there's very good weather here. There's cost of living doesn't seem that high compared to some of these other cities. Why not? You're living, you're close to water. You're able to travel to Latin America, Europe. It's convenient for that. It's, and you can, there's so many different places to live here. So that's the other thing. People think of Miami, they think, oh, okay, South Beach, party, this and that. There's so many different neighborhoods here, and there's so much diversity here, just in terms of natural, like what you want to live. There's folks that work for us that live closer to the Everglades, like, in that kind of environment. There's folks that live in Fort Lauderdale, folks that live in all different suburbs of Miami. So you can kind of pick and choose. I think it's a little bit like LA, actually, where there's so many different neighborhoods and so many different vibes that you can kind of find whatever suits you and whatever you like. So I'm a big proponent of Miami. I have plenty of people that visit, every year on a normal year, that helps me reaffirm that and say, okay, people from all these other cities are coming to visit. There's a reason people come here. So yeah, that's my short spiel on Miami.
Yeah, I love that. And yeah, I hear you on, I think it's a good analogy to make to LA in terms of the vibe of all the neighborhoods. And because like that was definitely something I remember as a field organizer. Is like, I had all these different parts of the city that I was, like in charge of running, the field operations for. And I was just amazed by the diversity of kinds of people you run into. It was just like, just like retired Midwesterners and like, yuppie gay couples and just, Dominicans and just like all kinds of people and all kinds of niches. And just like, yeah, it's incredible the diversity that you have down there. And I think that is, like you're saying, super underrated. It's funny because you're talking just now about, working from home, and my head flashed, this image of, a day game, and all of a sudden it becomes a lot more feasible for people to go to a day game. And so, I feel like it would be, remiss of me to not ask, like, what are the things you're forecasting for COVID or thinking about or excited about or interested in? And we talked about some of the interesting things about, how you have to have this kind of binary outcome to plan for. And that's one thing. But, what else, what are some opportunities that you're seeing, coming out of, remote work, more distributed work, maybe people moving to Miami, maybe that's durable. Like what are the opportunities that you're seeing?
Yeah. So you hit on one of them. I mean, just people having, I think, more flexibility. I think that's one thing that has come out of COVID is that while people were forced to work from home, people have realized that people can work at kind of all different hours. As long as they're getting their work done, people can kind of have a little bit more flexibility in when they do their work and how they're doing their work. So I think that benefits us in the sense that, as you mentioned, day games. Many people would say, "Oh, no, I have work during the day. I can't do that." But I think we've now proven that sure, you can take 2 hours, 3 hours out of your day, go do something, whatever it is during the day, and then come back and make up that work at night or whenever you need to make it up. So I think that's one area of flexibility is just knowing, again, day games are typically, we turn them into camp days, when school's in summer, when you have summer day games, you say, okay, let's bring all the camps in, let's do that. But I think there's an opportunity to grow that and bring folks that are working from home. Again, we'll have to see. As you mentioned, we're optimistic and hoping that our opening day is April 1st. We're hoping that we can have everyone back and have a full house for April 1st when our season starts. But we have to plan for the worst as well. I mean, that's as a lawyer, as part of my job, but also as someone who's kind of our COVID response team, planning for that as well, saying, okay, what can we do to make people feel safe? Let's say some level of vaccines are distributed. Let's say there's some level of testing going on. What can we do to make fans feel safe? How do we socially distance suites? How do we socially distance blocks of seating? How do we make people feel, hey, this is a safe environment? And I think ultimately there is a demand for that. I mean, we do fan surveys and we talk to our fans a lot, and we get the sense that, people have been removed from sporting events for essentially a year. And there is a little bit of fatigue. There is a little bit of COVID fatigue of, okay, I'm ready to get back into the world. I'm ready to get back in society. I'm ready to go to a sporting event, but I want to be safe. I have a family at home. I have whatever other concerns. I want to be safe. And so that's what we're trying to do is really, really make it as safe as possible, saying we're taking every precaution we can. We're bringing in third parties to validate what we're doing. We want everyone to feel like this is a perfectly safe experience, just like, going to the supermarket or going to the CVS or whatever it is where, you've grown to maybe feel comfortable with those things. We want this to be an extension of that, where you feel comfortable coming to the ballpark and saying, okay, like this is going to be a safe, controlled experience, and something that I can take part in. So the opportunity for us is really just providing an outlet for people who want to get out and are willing to go attend a sporting event, knowing that all the safety and precautions are in place.
So I know that we need to wrap up now, and so maybe I'll pose a last question. I think it's interesting because you were so focused on the field that you're in, and so you had your eye on it for so long, and you were so entrepreneurial with how you approached it. Somebody didn't cover that. You launched a sports law journal, in law school, things like that. So you were so immersed in it. And, now you've been at the helm of this company for 10 plus years. So, through, two managements. And so you've seen so much, and I'm really curious, what surprised you the most, in your experience at the Marlins?
Yeah. I would say a couple things. So, the first thing that surprised me and is just how many different people it takes to put on a baseball game. That's a very basic kind of thing, but for me to really get under the hood and realize how many different people it takes doing their, unique little job, whatever it happens to be, in order to make a sporting event happen. I would have never guessed that from just being a fan or being outside of this world, just knowing how many different types of people, from payroll administrators to electricians to whatever you can think of, a scoreboard animator, all these little jobs that you just take for granted and don't really understand. But now kind of being in a management role, actually having to oversee and set budgets and think about, how many of these people we're going to have. What are we going to do in the future? What do we do during a COVID season? What do we do in a full season? Those types of decisions that are made on staffing and understanding each role and what it does. I mean, that to me is always a surprising element of how many people it takes. You think of a boat, like a canoe or I'm blanking on the word, not a kayak, but for rowing, when you got this many people rowing in the right direction, that's kind of the way I look at it. You need like 200 people rowing in the right direction, and you have one person rowing in the wrong direction, it could screw up the whole thing. So that's kind of the way I look at it. And I'm always fascinated by how many people it takes to actually do that. The other thing that has really surprised me is just how sophisticated the business of sports has gotten. I think when I look back, 20 years ago, a lot of these sports teams were owned by family businesses. This was the person had their own business or whatever it was. They bought the sports team and it was their toy. They put their family members in as management, and they just kind of ran it like that. It was like having a yacht or another luxury toy, and it was just kind of there. They owned it for maybe vanity reasons to have a sports team, maybe for benevolent reasons. They wanted to give back to the community. But either way, it wasn't very sophisticated business. It was kind of just, I happen to own this team. That's another side business of mine. I enjoy going to the games, and that's that. And I think over the last 10, 15 years, we've seen with new ownership coming in, particularly you see it in the NBA, but also now in baseball, that the folks that come in are very sophisticated, very cutting edge. You get a lot of folks from private equity. You get a lot of folks from Wall Street, professional services firms, consulting firms. This business, I think, has just taken such a transformation, and the level of sophistication is just that much greater, where I look at every decision we make, it goes through so many layers of vetting, and just that level of sophistication, I think, is just new to the way sports teams are valued. I mean, you look at these valuations of teams. I mean, we sold for roughly $1.2 billion. Like that, when you think about that, you say, okay, yes, that makes sense to have all these people kind of focus on the valuation and the revenue streams and the operating costs and everything else that go with it. But for the longest time, you look at the values that folks paid when they bought these teams, like 20 years ago, they were paying 40 million, 100 million. So these things have exploded in value. And with that comes just the level of sophistication that, I think this industry wasn't used to, and now we've all gotten used to it with newer ownership groups and newer management teams coming to place, where people are very sophisticated, and it's kind of raised the level for everybody in terms of how we operate and being strategic, and how we make decisions.
After you said that, I can't resist asking one last question.
Sure.
So I guess take your pick of who you'll answer this for. So maybe it's for a Marlins fan. Maybe it's for someone who loves baseball, or maybe someone who doesn't really, isn't that invested in sports, maybe a casual fan or whatever. What's something that you want them to take away about, the Marlins or baseball? What's something you want to impart on someone in the
Sure. No, I think it ties into what we talked about earlier. I mean, I think we are competing with we're competing for your entertainment dollar. We're competing for your discretionary income here, and we want to be known as a very affordable, the most affordable sport in our view, and a very entertaining product. So, come spend 2-3 hours with us. You will be entertained for that time. We have plenty going on at the ballpark, whether you're a baseball fan, whether you're not. We view it as a social experience. That's what we've kind of transitioned to. Like, we know that we have people on a full spectrum of hardcore baseball fan who may sit in their seat and kind of keep score the old fashioned way. This is someone who's just there to, like, as a friend of a friend or something, tag you along for happy hour. So we want everyone to feel welcome. We want everyone to feel like, hey, I can have a good time here for a couple hours, which is, again, all we're asking is come for a couple hours, enjoy yourself. There's plenty plenty of things going on at the ballpark besides the baseball game. Obviously, again, that's the focus, but again, we want to cater to all folks and all across the spectrum of fans, and feel like they're getting entertained for their dollar, which again we feel is our ticket prices are extremely low. We've got a very cheap concessions menu, so we've done what we can to kind of make it as affordable as we can, because we know that's always been a complaint about these types of events. So we've done that, and we just hope that people give us a chance and come out, and hopefully they will be entertained.
All right, that's a good pitch, because as somebody like myself who's been to maybe 3 Cubs games and 2 Sox games, I mean that hits for me. So now I might, if I'm in Miami, I might actually hit up a Marlins game. So that's good.
Yes, good to hear.
Hey man, I'm glad we did this. I think it's super cool what you do, and I'm glad you shared it with me. And I think it's going to be interesting to a lot of people.
Happy to do it, and thanks for having me. And yeah, hopefully people find it interesting.
Yeah, man.